Um, I'm just going to start off by saying that this entire live stream deserves a trigger warning. We're going to be talking about child abuse, torture, conversion therapy, death, yeah, and more horrible stuff. Um, don't force yourself to listen to this if you can't handle that sort of thing, okay? Self care is more important than my live stream.
And if you say otherwise, I disagree and I will have to remind you.
Yes. So, this is, as you can see, about ABA or Applied Behavior Analysis. It is currently the most common treatment for autistics. Autistic advocates are constantly fighting against it, but parents of autistic kids and large organizations like Autism Speaks endorse it. Before I get going, I just want to say that if you're an autistic who was helped by ABA, my criticism is not directed at you, but at ABA itself. Now, how did ABA start? What is it? How harmful is it? Let's find out whether we want to or not.
This might be a bumpy ride.
ABA was started in the 1970s by Ole Ivar Lovas, a Norwegian American psychologist. However, his research was started in 1962 when he established the Young Autism Project Clinic at the University of California. Here, he implemented a procedure he described as discrete trial training, which was used to teach autistic children things like eye contact, motor skills, expressive language, and a whole host of other things. During this procedure, a therapist would give the child a prompt and would give reinforcement depending on the child's response. A positive response if the child followed the prompt correctly, and a negative one if they didn't. The negative responses were things like electric shocks, slaps, verbal reprimands, and withholding food and affection. The child would also get a negative reprimand if they stimmed, avoided eye contact, or climbed on furniture. It wasn't just during sessions that autistics would have to deal with this. Lovas also taught parents, usually mothers, how to continue treatment even at home. 25 years later, in 1987, Lovas published a study saying that after 40 hours a week of this treatment, 9 of the 19 autistic children could communicate in a typical fashion, had increased their IQs by 30 points, and could participate in regular classrooms. However, it's impossible to test if this actually worked, because to do so would mean to recreate it, and it can't be for ethical reasons. That tells you just how bad this project was, if it can't be recreated because it's an ethics violation. I'm not too shocked that Lovas would do such horrid things to autistics, though. He didn't exactly have the highest opinion of us. How about I quote him so you can get an idea of how he felt about us? Quote goes, "You see, you start pretty much from scratch when you work with an autistic child. You have a person in the physical sense. They have hair, a nose, and a mouth, but they are not people in the psychological sense. One way to look at the job of helping autistic kids is to see it as a matter of constructing a person. You have the raw materials, but you have to build the person. He didn't see autistics as people. He saw them as less than human. And when you dehumanize someone, it's a lot easier to do horrible things to them. It was obvious that Lovas had no interest in finding out why autistic children would behave the way they did. He didn't care about what the root cause of stimming was, or why autistics didn't like maintaining eye contact. All he cared about was forcing them to act like a neurotypical child. And if that was at the expense of the child's comfort and safety, so be it. They weren't people to him, so why should he treat them as such? It's sickening. What's worse is that Lovas saw himself and his research as moral. He saw himself as the good guy. A key part of his methods was hopelessness. He would constantly push the hopelessness of autism and the future of the autistic child. This pessimism was what was used to justify the intensity, cost, and violence in the treatment. Often his patients, more like victims, had had prior treatment before being sent to Lovas. He used the fact that the previous treatments didn't work as proof of how good his work was, and how autistic children needed to be treated with his methods for there to be any improvements. However, a study in 1998 stated that such early intensive behavioral intervention, also known as EIBI, or early intervention, should be regarded with skepticism. The study doubted Lovas's methods, but sadly, the next year, in 1999, the United States Surgeon General endorsed Lovas's study and stated that it had shown how effective applied behavioral methods were at reducing, quote-unquote, inappropriate behavior and increased communication, learning, and appropriate social behavior. I'm surprised that anyone would see this as a success when Lovas's own study stated that only 9 out of 19 autistic children apparently benefited from it. That's 47%. That's not even a passing grade. There is no mention of how the other 53% of the children reacted to the treatment. Did they change? Did they stay the same? Are they PTSD-ridden messes now? Who knows? Now, we can't talk about the history of ABA without bringing up Lovas's involvement in conversion therapy. Dubbed the Feminine Boy Project, Lovas and George Reckers, a bizarrely appropriate name, used similar methods as ABA to increase masculine behaviors in boys, such as playing with boys, roughhousing, and choosing toys made for boys, and to decrease feminine behaviors, such as playing with girls, playing with dolls, and having, I kid you not, swishy wrists. You know, that stereotypical gay limp wrist thing? Yeah, that. Parents were trained to praise their sons for behaving in a masculine manner and to ignore or even hit the boy if they acted more femininely. Much like with using hopelessness to justify his treatment of autistics, he used it to justify the Feminine Boy Project. The rationale they used was predictions of, and I'm paraphrasing Reckers here, serious disabling consequences for adults that may range from interference with a normal heterosexual relationship to a continuing sense of shame and fear of disclosure, which can be extremely disabling. And this wasn't just about sexuality either. This was about gender too. They stated that if not treated, a more harmful consequence could come about in the form of altering their bodies through surgery or hormone treatment. The Feminine Boy Project wasn't just gay conversion therapy, it was trans conversion therapy. Reckers said that preventative intervention in early childhood was needed to avoid cross gender behaviors, and that without treatment, these children may easily be exploited by medical professionals in their adult life. Apparently, they thought that doctors were just on the prowl for easy prey to give gender reassignment surgery to. Lavas stated in 1987, in the 1987 study, Lavas stated in a 1987 study, that those who went through the Feminine Boy Project were indistinguishable from their normal friends. Normal! And do you want to know what disturbs me most about this study? It's the same thing that disturbs me about Lavas's other 1987 study, the one that of the benefits of ABA. I was alive when these studies were released. Yeah, I was only a year old, but it shows how recent these things were. These aren't relics of the past. Yes, good question. What is normal anyway? So, now that we're done talking about that horrid monster, let us talk about modern ABA. Many of those who are pro-ABA will state that while ABA was bad in the past, what with the electric shocks and physical abuse, it's different now. They state that it's no longer the trauma-inducing mess that it used to be. But are they correct? No, they're not. Sorry for the spoiler, but come on. I'm pretty sure most of you knew the answer already. Even though in 2019, the US Department of Defense released a report saying that ABA doesn't work, and other reports having stated that those who were exposed to ABA were 86% more likely to have PTSD than those who weren't. With all that, you'd think that that would cause people to stop relying on it. But no. There's actually a huge divide between autistics and parents of autistics between the validity of ABA. Autistics will tell personal stories of the harm ABA did to them, and parents will tell personal stories of how ABA helped their child. There are pro-ABA people who believe that autistic adults who were harmed by ABA are a small minority who just had bad therapists. But that just isn't true. Even though ABA isn't as violent as it used to be, although I will get to that later, that doesn't mean it isn't abusive and traumatic. Let's start with something that hasn't changed from ABA. that its primary goal is to change the behavior of autistics. Here's the thing: when a child acts out, there's usually a reason. They're trying to communicate with you. And this is true for autistic children as well. When an autistic stims or has a meltdown or shuts down, it isn't for no reason. However, with ABA, forcing autistics to stop that behavior, it's shutting off a form of communication. Stimming could be a sign of distress, and the autistic is just trying to soothe themselves. But if they're forced to stop stimming, not only do you lose a message that's being communicated, the message being, I'm in distress, but they also lose that form of self-soothing. They're in distress, and there's nothing they can do about it. This teaches them that it's better to be calm and quiet than to signify that they may need help. This teaches them that their needs aren't important. Another issue with modern ABA is that it's a compliance-based therapy. The goal of therapy is supposed to be to help you. But with ABA, it's about learning to follow orders no matter what. Not only is this a problem in and of itself, the ways that children are encouraged to comply, they're ignored or have their toys or even food withheld from them. Adults giving other adults a silent treatment is often seen as childish and manipulative. But apparently it's okay if you do it to an autistic kid. And it's not just that's the problem. It's the fact that autistic children are taught that their body isn't their own. They're taught that when they're told to do something, whether they want to or not, they must do it. They don't get to choose what to do with their own body. When a child is taught to comply to an adult's command, no ifs, ands, or buts, they become perfect targets for predators. Their understanding of consent is so warped that their bodily autonomy is no longer a primary concern. Compliance is. And that's dangerously easy to exploit. Autistic adults who have gone through ABA have opened up about their struggles with saying no, withdrawing consent, and putting their wants and needs above the wants and needs of others. They were taught that having barriers and standing up for themselves results in punishment. ABA, by being a compliance-based therapy, is a recipe for abuse. To add more to this pile of horrible, you want to know how many hours a week autistics are expected to endure ABA? 20 to 60 hours a week. 20 hours is viewed as the absolute minimum. That's 4 hours every weekday. However, most therapists view 40 hours as the most optimal. That's a full-time job. Not to mention that these kids often also have school. In Canada, the average school day is 7 hours long. Apparently, autistics aren't allowed to have free time, social lives, hobbies, or extracurricular activities. Just school and ABA. And of course, their parents are encouraged to continue this treatment at home. These kids have nowhere that they can freely stim or just be themselves. They always have to be on. They're constantly pushed, both mentally and physically, with little to no rest. In Lavas's writing, he said that the optimal ABA team should be between 4 to 8 people, each working 4 to 8 hours a week. So the people doing ABA with the kid should only do it between 4 to 8 hours a week. But the kid has to endure 20 to 60 hours a week. I know some autistics like to call their autism a superpower, but holy crap, this is unreasonable. Want me to keep going? Of course you don't, but I'm going to anyways.
No.
Through ABA, autistics are taught that being themselves is wrong. They're taught that they're broken and that their behavior needs to be fixed if they're ever going to make it in life. If they want to be accepted by society and viewed as human, they have to change. So often, autistics are viewed as subhuman. And this was especially true for our good old friend, Lavas. Yes, he's coming up again. I'm sorry. Hey, I know. Let's bring up one of his brilliant and not offensive in any way quotes. Lavas said, "With responsibility, the developmentally disabled individual takes on dignity and acquires certain basic rights as a person, because apparently they didn't deserve it in the first place or something." The quote continues, "No one has the right to be taken care of, no matter how slurred he is." In my Disability Day of Mourning video, I talked about how when an autistic person is murdered by a parent or caregiver, the murderer is often given a very light punishment, if one at all, and that the public usually sympathizes with the murderer, not the murder victim. Autistics are dehumanized, seen as lesser in the eyes of the general public, and ABA reinforces this. It teaches both the autistic child and their parent that acting autistic is improper. It pushes the idea that if an autistic person wants to be treated as a human, they need to act neurotypical. I've read of dog trainers saying that they wouldn't even subject their dogs to the treatment that autistics have to endure in ABA. This is the reality of the situation and the reality of modern ABA. But here's the major issue. When a child is diagnosed as autistic, the parent is pushed to start them on ABA. Not only that, but in some places, ABA is often the only therapy for autistics covered by insurance. The ABA lobby has worked hard to throw its money around to make sure it has as much of a monopoly on the market as possible. I remember Neurodivergent Rebel explaining how they've been uninvited to speak at events about autism because they're publicly anti-ABA. There's also the parents who put their children through ABA, who often push back against criticism because they refuse to accept that they may have hurt their child. They were told that without ABA, their child had no hope, and the thought that they may have been wrong and that their child may be forever scarred because of it is too harsh of a reality for them to face. So this is going to be a subject that we're going to be talking about: torture, child abuse, death, that sort of thing. Even though most instances of ABA don't use physical abuse or electroshocks anymore, Some still do. One institution that is still open to this day and used electroshocks until the FDA banned it just last year in 2020 is the Judge Rottenberg Educational Center in Canton, Massachusetts. Even though electroshocks have now been banned in the US, the Institute is known for so many other despicable practices. JRC was founded by Matthew Israel in 1971. This year is their 50th anniversary. It's had locations in Rhode Island, which moved to Massachusetts in 1996 and is still open today, and in California, which Israel ran without a license because the California Department of Health denied the institution one since they found that there was insufficient evidence that Israel was responsible enough to comply with regulations. When the California branch was shut down, it was reopened as a co-op school and renamed Behavioral Research Institute of California, and applied for a license as a group home instead. I am just seeing a field of red flags with this. In 1981, California launched an investigation on the institute after a student died. The investigation found that students had been beaten, restrained, humiliated, and that they had extreme bruising that the staff had been trained to conceal from family and doctors. Because of the investigation, the Institute was banned from punishing students with negative physical stimuli, such as electroshocks, withholding meals, or restraints. Israel was also banned from entering the institution, but it was just taken over by someone else and renamed Tobin World. The institution denies that any of that ever happened because, of course, it does. In 1988, Israel developed the GED, or the Graduated Electronic Decelerator. It's a wearable device that unruly students were forced to have on. JRC has stated that electroshocks were only ever used as a last resort to stop violent or self-harming behaviors. But a report by the New York State Education Department in 2006 found that it had been used for other such heinous acts as being untidy, wrapping their foot around the leg of a chair, taking a break from work for more than 10 seconds, closing their eyes for more than 5 seconds, using the bathroom without asking for permission, peeing themselves when they were denied the use of the bathroom, and screaming while being shocked. It's so unbelievably disgusting how these poor people were tortured for nothing. I'm sorry, but what's wrong with wrapping your foot around the leg of a chair, or giving your brain a break for more than 10 seconds, or giving your eyes a rest for more than 5 seconds, or using the bathroom? Last I checked, neurotypical people do this too. You may be wondering how parents would be fine with this. And when the FDA investigated JRC, they found that many parents were either pressured into consenting to their child being shocked, or were just flat out lied to when it came to the risks of electroshock. They weren't told that these shocks could cause burns and tissue damage. They weren't told of the psychological damage it could do, such as causing depression, fear, and aggression. And as for the staff, one former teacher's assistant that worked there said that the staff were supposed to use shocks no matter what the student had done. They were constantly monitored by cameras. and worried that if they didn't comply with the higher ups, they'd be fired. This TA explained that students had to wear the GEDs all the time, even when they slept. They'd be shocked awake in the middle of the night and then would be shocked if they couldn't stay awake during the day. One former student who had been shocked awake at night stated, "It was not explained to me why I got this shock. I was terrified and angry. I kept asking why, and they kept telling me no talking out." After this incident, I really stopped sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, they would jump open, anticipating that jolt somewhere in my body. I'm honestly glad that the FDA has finally banned electroshocks, but it is so incredibly overdue. It's done so much damage. However, even with the GED, without the GED, the institution is still open and can continue to do damage. So far, there have been 5 deaths because of JRC. Danny Oswald was 14 and died while being restrained face down on a bed. Vincent Militich was 22 and died of asphyxiation and an epileptic seizure while being restrained. Abigail Gibson was 29 and after many physical punishments died of a heart attack. Linda Cornelison was 19 and died due to a gastric perforation, basically a hole in her intestinal tract. Her cries of pain were interpreted as her acting out, and she was subjected to 56 physical punishments before an ambulance was called. She died in the hospital. Silverio Gonzalez was 16 and died after fleeing the institution. Out of desperation to escape JRC, he jumped from a transport truck and suffered a fatal head injury. To anyone that says that ABA isn't physically dangerous anymore, tell them about the Judge Rottenberg Educational Center. So, as someone, sorry, as someone who's never experienced ABA, thank goodness, thank you, Mom and Dad, I figured that it would be better if I read out some personal stories from autistics who have gone through ABA, parents with autistic children who have gone through ABA, loved ones of autistics who have gone through ABA, and professionals such as teachers and former ABA therapists. I'll start with the stories from autistics. One person says that ABA has made them super flinchy and that their grandfather, who got an early version of ABA, was visibly left unable to mask and relax. Another person says that they experienced torture and would shut down due to ABA. They can't understand their own needs and are unable to ask for basic things to survive since they were taught that their needs didn't matter. They can't communicate effectively and haven't learned any skills to live independently. They say that they don't know who they are and that it's a struggle to try and learn who they are at 40 years old. Another person says that ABA therapists tried to change who they were as a person by mentally abusing them to train them to be quote unquote better. They explained that it was the hardest thing that they've ever been through. It disconnected them from their family as they felt they couldn't trust them and that they weren't loved by them. It made them fearful of all face to face interactions because they're still mentally afraid of the consequences, even though it's been over a decade since their last ABA session. They have lifelong PTSD because of it. Another says that they were physically restrained for not following instructions, quiet hands, and eye contact to BS. Their hobbies were shamed and ridiculed, and they were told to have more girly and age appropriate hobbies. They were forced to try new foods, and by forced, they mean the food was forced into their mouth and then would be yelled at for vomiting afterwards. One day they brought their comfort item, and it was forcibly taken from them. They were told that they could have it back if they did well. Their sister had to get it back 3 days later. One person describes ABA as an expensive PTSD-inducing hell they wish they hadn't had gone through, and I'd say that is a perfect description. Another explains that it ruined their ability to say no, taught them that they didn't have bodily autonomy, and primed them for abuse later in life. The stories from parents of autistic children who have gone through ABA are as follows. One parent explains how ABA was used on their daughters when they were in elementary school prior to diagnosis. The parent was never told that the methods the teachers were using were based on ABA. Now the daughters have PTSD, low self-esteem, and an inability to regulate their emotions. Another parent says that their son was enrolled in a pre-kindergarten program where the teacher used ABA on him. There was a huge shift in the son's overall well-being and attitude. He now shows symptoms of anxiety and needs rewards for any type of demand. Another states that their son was in an award-winning ABA preschool for 6 months before they realized that it was detrimental. While their son's verbal understanding and use improved, their behavior became more explosive. His anxiety amped up after a few months due to constant demands. The parent pulled their son out when he started to physically fight them to avoid school. Another says that when their child was diagnosed at the age of 3, the parent was told that the optimal outcome would be that their child would be indistinguishable from their peers. For 2 years leading up to the start of school, and for a good portion of their child's elementary school experience, they were subjected to ABA therapy. Their child is now a young teen with a range of mental health challenges and feels very strongly that ABA sent the message of, "You are less than." Loved ones of autistics who went through ABA also shared their stories. One person says that their loved one sometimes doesn't know who they are anymore. Their loved one told them that they feel like a shell of the person they were before, and when situations come up that otherwise could have been managed by stimming, they melt down. Their loved one was perfectly fine before. Another explains that both they and their partner are autistic and were very similar as children. Their partner was sent to ABA, whereas this person was not. Not only does their partner have more trouble regulating their emotions and dealing with the emotions of others, but their mother, who was the one who enrolled this person's partner into ABA, is much more hostile towards harmless autistic behaviors such as stimming than this person's family is. One states that they have seen it do harm to a good friend. Their friend became ill from the stress of pretending to be neurotypical. And another says that their autistic friend was damaged by ABA, suffered a great deal, and was left in an institution. Here are a few stories from professionals. One person briefly worked in a school that used ABA. They say that it was nothing short of horrific and put adults in a place of extreme power over the children, controlling their every move and handling them constantly. The adult was always right, and the child was always wrong, broken, and in need of fixing. They explain that this is in the UK and in extremely recent years. They saw signs of trauma, especially in children who had been in ABA for a long time, such as starting to pull out hair, a desire to please out of fear by repeating, I'm happy, and trying to smile even when crying, and meltdowns triggered by the demands of ABA itself. The staff would see dealing with meltdowns, especially when the child became violent, as a badge of honor because it showed that they were doing their jobs. Children were left with no autonomy whatsoever and no dignity. Skills were tokenized, but ultimately crushed under the more prominent demands of point to the cat, good job, quiet hands. They explained that it didn't matter if a child was skilled in math or piano. What matters was that they could learn stock phrases to sound neurotypical and comply. Another explains that they worked in education and have seen a couple of children who have been put through ABA. They state that contrary to Lovas's idea that autistic children who go through ABA become indistinguishable from their peers, it's often easy to spot the students who have been through ABA. They come across as quite passive and unquestioningly compliant. They go on to explain how, while it does make their job as a teaching assistant easier, that shouldn't be a reason to make children do ABA. They say that it feels wrong to change the child's behavior just to make things easier for teachers and parents. One child had a full-time ABA tutor with them in school, which this person saw as counterproductive, as this student had fewer opportunities to interact with other children in the classroom, as the tutor was always the one interacting with them. It marked them out as different, which the student didn't like, and they struggled to make friends. The ABA was a barrier to them making friends, as they were being encouraged to present a false version of themselves to the other students. The teacher also feels that this student would have had an easier time making friends if they had been allowed to do it their own way and in their own time, rather than having friendships engineered for them by their ABA tutor. And finally, one former ABA therapist explains that it was definitely abusive. When their bosses found out that they were autistic, they said the company never had an autistic employee and played an Autism Speaks video at the next staff meeting about how horrible it was to have autistic children. They felt like their bosses were trying to get them to quit, between that and refusing their reasonable accommodations. With these sorts of stories, and trust me, there are many, it's easy to imagine the harm that ABA does without experiencing it yourself. Because, again, I'm lucky enough to have not gone through it. Okay, let's let's get away from all that horribleness and round off this live stream with reading emails. I have one here that asks 4 questions, so I'm going to split it up into 4 parts. It reads, "Hello, I've been reading your comic and following your live streams, and I have a few questions where I need advice. How to travel comfortably in public transport when I'm autistic? Headphones. Preferably headphones playing your music. I must have my headphones on playing my music if I go anywhere in public, especially if I have to use public transportation. I haven't in a long time for obvious reasons, but you know. I also always play on my phone, apps and such. It helps keep me distracted until I reach my destination. However, I have to make sure it's an app that I can easily look away from and close just so I don't miss my stop. My app of choice is Wordscapes because I like word puzzles. I've also gotten back into crossword puzzles. But yeah, I find the key to enduring public transportation is enough distraction to keep me from getting overwhelmed, but not enough that I miss my stop. What are good tips when panic or anxiety attacks, meltdowns, or shutdowns are coming? For me, if I'm in a stressful situation that's causing these things to come on, I need to completely remove myself from it and find a quiet, safe place to calm down. From there, I keep my brain distracted. I listen to videos or vlogs, I play calming video games like Animal Crossing, and I do my best to just relax. If the panic attack is still coming on, you can try this grounding exercise. Look around you. Name 5 things that you can see. Then, name 4 things that you can feel or are touching. Then 3 things that you can hear, 2 things that you can smell, and finally, 1 thing you can taste. My friend taught me this when I started having panic attacks. This can help calm you down. I know it works for me. If nothing helps, then you may need to seek professional help. I'm currently on anxiety medication because no matter how hard I tried, my anxiety was still high and my panic attacks kept coming. I'm worried I don't stim as much as I did when I was younger. Is the lack or decrease of stimming a sign of something? Yes, it's a sign you don't need to stim as much. Stimming is a coping mechanism, and as some of us age, we either don't need to cope as much, or we learn different coping mechanisms. My main stim for basically all of my life is rocking back and forth. I'd rock for hours a day. Now I don't need to do this as much because, 1, I'm not in school anymore, so I don't have that stress in my life. And 2, I've learned how to either deal with or avoid certain stressful situations. We're usually better at handling the stresses of life as we mature. Yes, Emily, it was you. You were the friend I was talking about. How to enjoy fixations and special interests. This really depends on you and your special interests. If it's media like movies and shows, watch them and indulge in fan made content like fan art and fanfics. Maybe make some of your own. If it's art or crafts, the easiest way to enjoy them is to do them, provided you can afford the supplies. As someone whose special interests used to be cosplaying when I was in my older teens and younger 20s, some hobbies are really expensive. If it's a study like history, science, or the like, do research. Watch educational videos and shows, read books, look up peer reviewed studies. There's so many ways a person can indulge in their special interest. It all depends on what works for you. Thank you for the email. I hope my answers helped. And remember, if you want to ask me something, just send me an email to the address in the description below. And of course, now is the time I thank my lovely patrons, starting with, of course, my dad. Thank you, Dad, for not putting me through ABA. I really appreciate it. And of course, big thanks to Dominic. I super appreciate it. And Nick, who will remain up here until next month. And all of my other patrons. You are all super, super appreciated. I love you all. Sorry, I have to cough. Okay. The Real Kingdom Housewife. This live topic is so important and means so much. I have been hoping that something like this would be done. Thank you for doing this Autie-Biographical. I can't wait to share this. Yes, this will become public on Wednesday. So yeah, if you want to share it around, go right ahead. I'm also going to be chopping it up into clips so people can just watch certain parts of it. Anonymous, I didn't know stimming was a coping mechanism. That must be why stimming greatly increased in high school. Yes, it's a way that we soothe ourselves. It's just sort of our way of dealing with the world. So, right, announcement. During the premiere of the SEA review that I did, which, by the way, has gotten over 600 views, which is incredible. Thank you. I remember chat got on the topic of stim toys, and someone brought up bubble wrap. I can't remember who. Eventually, that led into talking about the infinite bubble wrap stim toy being mentioned. Well, I have ordered one, and I'm going to be doing an unboxing video. I'll have the video up on my Patreon for my $5 and $10 patrons a week before I release it to the public. But I am not 100% sure when that will be yet. I will announce when it is available to the public, though. I don't know... Actually... You know what? Being in front of the camera and making a video was fun with the SEA review. Maybe I'll do more like that, but it really depends on if I can find the time to do them, and if I can find stuff to do them on, since I already talk about the big autism topics on my live stream, and I don't really feel like replacing my live streams with videos instead, because I like doing these. I don't know, it's just more open and personal. Does that make sense? Anyways, we'll see what the future holds. But yeah. I don't know. Maybe if the unboxing goes really well, I'll just become an unboxing channel.
I don't see that happening. That this doesn't seem quite like you.
No, it doesn't. Anyways, thank you all for coming. I'm glad you were able to survive through all of that. It was a very heavy topic. And yeah, you made it. You survived. I'm proud of you. Anyways, it is almost 9 p.m. here, and my throat hurts and I'm tired. So I'm going to say goodbye for now. You're all awesome, and I shall see you next weekend.